All right, it's been like 2 weeks since I've worked on this thing. Been feeling extremely guilty about it, but I feel like I have a pretty good excuse because it snowed over 2 feet and it's been pretty much below zero every day, including today still. But I got a Saturday off and we got to get some work done. But I am hugely excited for this. I'm excited because I decided to make a huge change in this project, which includes these two, which was only supposed to be one. I left last night to go buy one four-wheeler, and it was a whole debacle, but I'll tell you about that when I get back in the garage and it's warm. But here we have, I know this is a Polaris 325, four-wheel drive, chain drive, front and rear, with suspension. I'm assuming this is also a 325, but I don't know. It was a mess. But the problem is, I can't get my truck to fire up because last night when I got back home late, I forgot to plug it back in. And the batteries have seemed to have a draw lately, so it's a little less than happy. It's like, I think it's still below zero. When I woke up this morning, it was -5. So I gotta get this thing fired up, move all my other cars, get this back to the garage. The crane stopped working because it's so cold, so I gotta figure out how to unload these. It's gonna be a real mess. All right, I'm gonna risk my camera freezing up. I might die, but we're gonna try and just slide it down on its belly. My other ramp's jammed over there, so we can't do that. Okay, that took all morning, but we finally have the more important of the two quads in here. So this is a late 90s, I think it's like a 98 Polaris 325. At least that's what the listing said, which was sort of a lie. So I went and drove and got these things last night, Friday night, left after work, drove 2 hours to the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin to buy these. And when I got there, the guy said, "Oh yeah, you're meeting with my buddy. I'm at work." I was like, okay. Walk back behind the guy's shop. He's telling me about how I need to watch out for coyotes because apparently there's a crap load of them around his house. And lo and behold, there is a four-wheeler back there, but it is not the four-wheeler in the listing. So I instantly call him out. The four-wheeler in the listing had a motor, plastics. I had checked with him before I came that it was still complete in the way that the listing showed. He said yes, and this is what he showed me. This is not even the four-wheeler from the listing. The one on my bed is, but the guy had told me it had a rear axle, and the one on the bed of my truck, which is still outside, does not have an axle. So he had to run around, call his buddy, figure out what was going on. Ended up, I guess someone got the axle. I don't know who did. And some other parts that were missing from it. So ended up, I was kind of upset, and thankfully they ended up throwing this one in as well as the other one because I need the transmission out of the other one and I need the axles and everything out of this. I might need the transmission out of the other one. So I think we ended up getting a better deal. We now have double the front end parts, double the suspension parts, double the steering parts. I do have two 22-inch rear tires that they threw in. The tires are iffy, but they should work for mock-up at least. It will be shorter tires than the 23s that we had on it. They'll also be skinnier. I think in the end, that'll be better. But anyway, it was a whole debacle. I was upset at first. Quite frankly, very annoyed that I drove 2 hours to get there and it not be the original listing. But hey, I think it worked out. So the plan is, I've been doing some thinking, and it couldn't be a more perfect donor, I don't think. The wheel width is pretty much the same. I think it was like 28 inches wide from hub flange to hub flange. This might be a skosh wider, which would be good because we'll match the width of these tires that were on here, the thick ones. And the wheelbase is like dead on from axle to axle. So that's really lucky. I'm going to start with the front suspension, which is going to be tough. This is going to way more complicate this project, but it'll be worth it in the end because we're going to be gaining hydraulic brakes in the front. I don't know how the rear brakes work. I think it's something tied in with the transmission, so we might not have rear brakes on this axle. We'll just go forward with something else. We'll figure that out. Gain hydraulic brakes for the front axle, suspension, shocks, way better steering system, and most importantly, four-wheel drive. You'll see this has a center differential, chain input there, and yeah, so I'm a little worried. These are electric engaged front differentials, but I now have two of them, so between the two of them, I hopefully have a good one. If not, hopefully we can figure it out. Maybe we'll have to put a different differential in the future, but for now, we're going to use this stuff. So I got to do a lot of thinking now. I think this axle is going to have to go super far forward, changing our wheelbase, like I said, was just perfect. The motor's going to have to jam backwards. We're going to do away with that steering shaft, or gut box thing, which was not going to really work for what I wanted anyway. We're going to use this steering. I'm going to cut that shaft off down there. Universal joint, maybe multiple universal joints to get it around the engine. That's going to be a real pain in the neck. That's the thing I'm most worried about. The differential and everything, I think, is going to tuck up under the motor. I don't know. We have a lot of engineering and figuring out ahead of us. I think we'll chop the frame off and use the front part of this frame. I don't know. It would look a lot cooler if we did a complete custom frame, but that would be so much easier to use that. In the rear, I think we'll use the stock swing arm. Now, I hope this axle is around backwards right now for whatever reason. I think someone pulled it out and swapped it in. It looks reversible, so I can flop that around. That should get our sprocket in a similar placement for our transmission. And yes, I do still plan on using this drivetrain for now. That may change. I may find a snowmobile engine or a four-wheeler engine or something, but for now, I want to try this. I've always wanted to use one of these motor transmissions in something for whatever reason. I don't know. Yeah, so we'll use the swing arm and I guess the monoshock for now. We probably won't use the rear frame of this. I don't see any reason to. And what else? So the one thing I do need off the other one I mentioned was the transmission. Apparently they're separate from the engine. It's so buried in snow I can't really tell. But from what I've researched and what I've been told, they are separate from the engine with a chain input. So that means we could move the transmission around, put the transmission further forward, put the other transmission out of the Polaris in here. That way we have a sprocket facing the rear and the sprocket facing the front. Or what I'm going to try and do instead is you can pull the brake assembly off this and use that for another sprocket, run that forward to a jack shaft over to the four-wheel drive. I would like to do that just to eliminate having another transmission in the works, but we'll see what we can do. All right, I've been doing a little too much thinking and not enough doing, so we're just going to start making irreversible cuts and see what happens. All right, although it's a very rough idea, you kind of have an idea what's going to happen here. So what we're going to do next, we're going to knock that axle out of there, pull the motor up, knock that motor plate out, scoot it as far back as possible, get rid of the steering mount. We are going to jam this engine as very far back as possible to give us the most amount of room so we can get the suspension and everything as far back as possible to still keep it visually appealing when we put the front end on it, because that's the most important part, that this thing looks cool. Once we do that, we're going to figure out how far back I can trim on this. I probably take it right behind the A-arm right there. Trim it off as straight as possible. We'll take a piece of square tubing and use it in there to connect our front end to the inside of our frame. Cut the excess frame off. I do still want a frame sticking out in front of this thing eventually because I want to still put a winch on it, but that's for the future. So yeah, that is the plan. All right, well, we got it mocked up pretty close. It's pretty incredible. Those tires are only an inch shorter, but they look tiny compared to these. But we can always up tire size, and I will. Those are the rear tires for it. I'll get another set of rims like that so we can have equally width tires. I don't want skinny in the front and fat in the rear. That would look a little funky. At least I don't think I do. They do perform better, but that's not why I started the video. I started the video because I've got it mocked up about where we will be lengthwise. Had to break the motor plate out of there, scooted it all the way back. The motor's now going to be into the firewall, which kind of stinks, but got to do what you got to do. I'd rather have 4x4 than foot room. So what we're going to do is we're going to tie the area that I cut off right into this motor plate. We're going to put a square tube right across the bottom at the front, tie that all in there, chop off the excess frame rail. That'll set our ride height. And yeah, that means a lot of the stuff in the front end is handled then. One thing I did see that's going to be a problem probably is the sprocket for the front axle right down there is like going to be probably pretty parallel to this. So we're going to have to like bring it up with a jack shaft or something. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do yet. Either bring it up or bring it down and run it under the motor plate and everything. It's going to be tough for sure. This thing's probably looking like it's going to have at least one jack shaft for the front or the rear. I want to try and keep it at only one. Less chains, the better. But we'll see. I'm going to keep moving along and go from there. All right, we got somewhat married together here. Snipped the frame down, which I did with my big Evolution circular saw, which consumes all of the power my garage can put out, so I had to shut the lights off. So couldn't film that portion. Then we just stabbed a pipe in there, or a piece of tubing in there crossways, which is what the the front end will weld to. We will do a lot more bracing than just welding it to that, but that's the start. And it's looking like everything's going to work. So we're just going to keep plugging away. Clean up that front suspension, tack that on, set the motor in there, get one more good look at how everything's going to work together, start to brainstorm our four-wheel drive situation, and go from there. All right. Looks quite a bit different now. Got it all tacked up there. We pulled the steering shaft out, which was pretty easy. There it is. It actually wasn't easy. You have to pull the big nut, which is kind of captured down there, so it's hard to get to, but thankfully it was pretty loose. Then you just undo the tie rods from the end and kind of tap it up out of there. You undo the clamp thing up here. So got that out. Undid the front bumper, which I won't be using. So it cuts down the front a lot. And then we cut off the steering support. So now we're going to have a very big moment of seeing if the hood is still going to fit. I'm really curious here. So, all right, moment of truth. Got a pretty good hunch that these shocks are in the way, but let's see how bad they are. It's like super close. All right, well, it sort of fits. Sort of. Let me see if I can do some adjusting. All right, well, I wouldn't say it fits. It does clear the shocks, but we're going to have to notch out a spot for the shocks to sit through because they're obviously going to move up and down. And I don't want to hear squeaking the whole time. That'll also help us drop it down on it, hopefully, to try and get us closer in height here. We can always space the body up. It's not really a big deal. I prefer not to, but it could be done. And I think the axle is sitting much farther forward, it looks, than the old one, which I had a fear of. So I think we'll move the front end up a little bit, and then we'll move the body up, which is fine because that axle's coming out of there, so we can reset our wheelbase. However, so that's why I decided to do the front, get the front all figured out, and then the rear, whatever the front height and length and position is, we'll just match it in the rear. So this should work. I wish this was like 2 inches wider. This is one of the big problems with this project. One thing I know I'm not going to like is I wish I would have made it wider for 2 people to sit in it. Right now it's only like 1.5, 2 people uncomfortably, 1 person and a dog. So in the future, I think it's 29 inches wide. I would make it at least 36 if you're going to build one of these yourself. But this one will just be a 1-seater. I can always build a 2-seater later, or I can space the seat up above the side of the body and make it wider. I don't know. We'll figure that out when we get further along. But for now, I'm not going to cut it apart and widen it or anything like that. So I'm going to do some thinking, and I'll get back to you guys when I got something figured out. All right, so in the idea of clearance for the shocks, decided I'm going to take this 3-inch Milwaukee hole saw bit, and we're going to cut out a half circle here, and then probably do the same thing sideways so we have clearance. I think that's the cleanest way to get a nice circle, in my opinion, right now. But I'm a little scared because I spent a fair amount of time on this hood, and I really don't want to mess it up. So we'll see how this goes. All right, well, I wouldn't say that cut went great, but it did it. I'm not a huge fan of using hole saws. They always seem like they're annoying, but give me a good starting point. I'll round it off the rest of the way with the die grinder. So that got us clearance for our shock, but we're still having a height issue. We've got a difference of about 2 inches. And I can bring the body up, but I really don't want to bring up 2 inches. Means I need to run new supports. I don't want to do all that. I don't want to see the frame any more than I need to. So if you look in here, you'll see it's hitting right on the top of the shock. So there's really nothing great to do here. And I really don't want to cut. This doesn't bother me. I kind of like how that looks, actually, but I don't want to cut a big honking hole up here and up here. Unless that's the only way. So I'm going to pull the hood off and see what I can do. Well, cut the holes here too. Did these at 2.5 inches. Functionality purposes, and it might even look better, is if I just do a straight cut down here and just make this one big oblong hole. I'm going to have to, or else that shock's going to destroy that hood. So not too worried about it right now, but we'll have to do that in the future. But that got us low enough, and especially when we do that, we'll definitely be low enough to match the body height, which is great. Might have to space it up a tiny bit, but not too much. We're going to have to kick the body forward about 3/4 to an inch, and we'll be golden. So heater just ran out of propane. It is just above 0 degrees, so it's pretty cold. So this is going to be a pretty quick little recap here, so I can get working and building some body heat. But we're going to go ahead and start on the rear end now. Get it all sitting on its own weight, then adjust the body accordingly. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the swing arm out of here. Look about flipping the axle how I think it should be, and getting it jammed up in there and see what's going on. We will have to move the body forward, and yeah, so let's go ahead and do that. All right, old solid axle is out of there. Glad to see that thing going. Those pillow blocks are definitely worn out. That was never going to work well. I mean, it would have worked okay, but I foresaw that giving me issues. Now we've got our ATV axle out, and I actually pulled this carrier apart and flipped the axle over so the sprocket's on the right side. I guess someone had this out at some point and didn't put it back together right. So we got that right. I'm going to try and use the factory swing arm, but we may end up having to build a custom one. Like 90% sure that transmission's going to have to come out of there and move further forward into the floorboard area probably, which is going to completely eliminate the chances of having a passenger. But like I said, it's worth it for suspension. Yeah. So I'm guessing that's going to have to come out of there. I'll have to move the belt tensioner. Maybe even that angle iron will have to come out of there. We'll scoot that all forward. Get our axle set in place. Get some sort of mount system tacked up. And go from there. All right, we got everything knocked out of our way. Transmission included in that cross member. So I just cut out a square tubing cross member, which we'll throw in there. And then I'm waiting for the plasma to slowly turn on, which is tough because it's like 3 degrees in here and computers don't really like that. Where we're going to knock out 4 tabs for mounting that. And that'll be right on the cross member. So that is the plan. We're probably going to have to do a couple tack. First, we'll have to center this in the center. We'll tack those tabs onto the square tubing, and then we'll roll the square tubing forward and back and just see where it's going to be best wheelbase wise, so we don't have any rubbing going on. I also put the tires on it that the guy threw in with the four-wheelers. So these are quite a bit wider than the fronts, as most four-wheelers are, which at first I thought was going to really bug me, but I might not mind it as much. And I know it's going to handle a lot better with those skinny tires, so I don't know. I definitely in the future want to go with something taller, but I might stay with the skinny tires, go skinny front and back. I don't know. We'll see. For now, these will work. They all seem to somewhat hold air. They're pretty cracked up, but they will do for mock-up in our first couple rides, hopefully. So let me go ahead and get some parts cut and get it all tacked up, and I'll show you guys what I come up with. All right, we got our first mock-up here. Can't say it's sitting on its own weight because it's not. That shock isn't mounted. It's still on jack stands, but the axle is mounted in there, which you can't really see with the body on it. But just doing some kind of estimations here. I don't really have, the wheel's relatively centered. We've got the tub scooted forward because of our front end. And right there, it's about butted up. It is going to have to come up some, I think, or that's going to have to come down even more. We'll just see what works. I'd rather it come down. Yeah. I think once I mount the shock back here, this wheel will be centered. I don't know. So I think I'm going to leave it tacked where it is and figure out our cradle that'll hold our shock. And I have a sneaking suspicion that it's going to sit like this a little. Also, might have to C-notch our frame eventually. Wouldn't really be a big deal, but I want plenty of clearance for that axle. I don't want to smack the axle against the frame every time I hit a bump. What else? Gotta cut out the floor. With this setup, that definitely means the transmission's going to be like right there. So we are totally losing our opportunity for a second person in here, but it's coming along. And among all that worrisome stuff, you just got to step back and admire this thing. This thing looks so cool. So I need foot space. So we just slid the transmission over here all the way. So the rear end going off that one, front end going off this one to a jack shaft, not necessarily this jack shaft, where it'll go over and up to there. So this only brings us down to one jack shaft, one regular chain connection back there. In theory, it'll fit with the tub on, but the biggest thing, the scariest part of it, is I need to cut out this section of the frame to sink the transmission down. Now, I'll cut it out for now. We'll put in the transmission mounting plate. That'll beefen it up, and then we will go back in and put a section of frame around it, tying into this body mount. You know, we're not going to just leave that frame out. It'll just have to mean that frame's edited, which isn't a big deal because I already still think I need to do a C-notch back here. So this frame is not going to stay how it is anyway. So kind of a wild idea, but should, in theory, work. All right, I think I made a decision here on the rear suspension situation. So one thing I'm really concerned about is that a single shock is not going to be enough. And the chain, running the chain for this is going to be kind of tough. And the third most important reason is that shock, where it mounts there, makes this thing sit on a gnarly rake. And to change that would be a lot of work on this thing. So rather than trying to modify that swing arm, we're going to build our own custom swing arm, incorporating a second shock from the other parts quad, which I just dragged inside. So we have dual rear shocks, custom swing arm, maybe a little shorter. I don't know. We'll mess with that. I really want to try and get the transmission farther back so it's not in the footwell. But that's the direction we're going to go. So we're going to build a custom swing arm, dual shocks. So let's go start ripping this guy apart.